Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, which is on behalf of the 8 organisations operating across the red squirrel range in Northern England and Southern Scotland. This is also supported by Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels and Scottish Wildlife Trust, who are not part of the formal partnership, but are helping us to develop the project in Scotland. Our panel today consists of many faces you probably know well. Sarah Beetham from the Animal and Plant Health Agency, Rachel Cripps from Lancashire Wildlife Trust, Mike Denbury from Red Squirrels Northern England, Bridget Johnson of the Reclaiming the Reg project, Giovanna Massai from the Botsterby Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control, Mike Pratt from Northumberland Wildlife Trust, Stephen Trotter of Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and Catherine Williams, who's our freelance consultant who's been doing an amazing job at pulling all this together. The aim of today is to provide you with an update into our plans for a submission to the National Hedgehogs Lottery Fund for a new project called the Red Squirrel Recovery Network. Presentation will take roughly an hour, and there will be half an hour for questions. Please put all questions to the panel in the Q&A section and use the chat for any general discussions or feedback. And remember to be kind to each other with anything you do write. We may not be able to respond to questions about individual groups, and we may not be able to respond to all questions, but we may suggest a follow-up conversation if that is more appropriate. With that said, I will hand over to Mike Pratt for the introduction.
Oh, thank you, Kay. Yeah, just a very quick few notes from me, really, and observations. I've been involved with red squirrel conservation for a good 15, 20 years with this trust and other organisations. And I think this is a real one of those pivotal points we reach every so many years where we really want big overarching resources to make a lasting impact and difference. And I think this is really more important perhaps than all of the others before it. So just wanted to say that from the start. It's certainly the biggest ever partnership project in terms of the number and scale of organisations, the collaboration that we're actually bringing together here. And obviously central to that are the volunteer local groups. The project really is, like all these big projects, strategic and local at the same time. And we know that we have to drill down to create the action that's needed on the ground, but it takes an effort across the whole geography, as that map shows, where we really do need to make a difference through collaboration at all levels. And I really do feel that this is really urgent now, and the need really is related to the 30 by 30 target that we're all trying to make a reality. But by 2030, we want to reverse biodiversity decline. Within that, we can't countenance in the UK the loss of such an iconic species of the red squirrel. That really would just be untenable. And so this is our last chance to nail it, I feel, for red squirrel conservation across the north of England and into the borders, Scotland. We've had many millions of pounds already spent on this already. I think this is our chance to turn the curve. We have actually made massive progress. We need to take it even further to make this a sustainable impact and keep reds in the landscape well into the future and forever. That will take new resources and a lot more cooperation than we've ever had between all of us. It's not just about the big money, though. I think the one thing I would say, since we talked to local groups, is that the National Lottery Heritage Fund would be very open to bids from local groups at the same time as this bigger bid actually takes shape and into the future. So it's not one or the other. It's about making a whole picture work together. And they're on board with that. And it's a sort of a belt and braces type approach. And there are two main elements in it, which I think we will reflect on as we go through the presentation. One is about innovative conservation, doing what we know works well and doing more of it and in a more concerted way, but also trying things like field trials for fertility control for greys, which could be an absolute game changer, needs to be, in fact, if we're going to sustain the effort going forward. And other ways of trying to naturally control grey populations, as well as what we know works as well. And the other thing is connecting it to people. This endearing, iconic species, the red squirrel, really is a fixer. It brings people into nature with all the benefits that they can give. And that's what the lottery are particularly interested in. Let's be honest, they want to connect it back to the people and the players who create the money. So that is a really important part of the project as a whole. So I don't think we'll ever have a more exciting a more comprehensive project than we're trying to put together. But the last thing I'll say is this is the start of a process of consultation, and it will take some time. We all have to be patient until it actually starts to hit the road, probably right down the road in 2025 with development before that. So we're playing the long game here for a very big impact at the end. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Catherine Williams, and I'm just going to talk you through what we learned from the volunteer survey, which I think most of you completed at the end of last year. Just before I start, I just want to check with Kay whether this is this now being recorded, because it's not popping up on my screen to show that.
Yes, it says recording on mine. Yep.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so in the volunteer survey, which we've been using to inform how we develop this project, we had responses from 227 people, which was from right across that map that Mike just showed, across all the different areas, Northumberland, Cumbria and Scotland. Each of those areas had about 30% each. And then there was a smaller number of responses from Merseyside, Tyne and Wear and other who were people that aren't linked to a group. Northumberland had the most responses in total, but it was still more or less a 30-30-30 split. I'm just going to share a few excerpts from that questionnaire and from what we learned from that. So one of the questions was, how long have you been a member of Red Squirrel Group? And actually almost half the responses were from people that were quite new to their local group, quite new to Red Squirrel conservation. We also asked about the main motivation for people to join groups, and that was, as expected, to safeguard and restore red squirrels. That was the thing that came out most strongly, with most responses mentioning conserving, protecting, bringing back or seeing reds return in the future. Other responses talked about generally supporting wildlife conservation, or some of them talked about controlling and reducing grey squirrels as a pest species. Most people who responded to the questionnaire said they would like to see more volunteers involved with their local group. I just wanted to put this pie chart just to recognise that we do understand it's more complex than that, and the responses talked about really that there was a need for volunteers in particular areas. Some groups were finding they'd got a lot of volunteers willing to do the monitoring and less volunteers willing to do the control. Some groups were finding that they really needed some younger volunteers, and there were some concerns around the succession of volunteering. People said it was always good to have more community volunteering, more community involvement, sorry. We need more volunteers to talk to the community, and also that volunteers are spread very thin in rural areas. So just to mention that we have read all the comments as well as the just the stats, if you like. We asked what were the top challenges, the biggest challenges facing groups at the moment, and these were the most popular responses to that question. So the biggest thing that 71% of people said that their group was finding challenging was lack of public awareness about the threats posed by grey squirrels. The second biggest challenge that 61% of respondents were facing was that there were not enough volunteers to carry out conservation activities within their group, and that was conservation activities as opposed to admin or governance activities. Finance and funding, 58% of people said that was a challenge in their group. 56% of people said lack of public awareness about the need to protect reds. And then finally, 43%, so a little bit lower for that one, difficulty in recruiting volunteers. But that's the top 5 challenges that were coming across consistently through the questionnaire. The other thing I just wanted to share from the questionnaire was a little bit of information about who our volunteers are. It's really important that we measure this and we understand what the current demographic is. For lots of reasons, it will help inform our project, it will help inform how we do marketing, it helps set a baseline so we've got something to monitor against, and it also enables us to set realistic targets with regard to engaging a wider range of people and diversifying our volunteer base. So slightly surprisingly, a lot more male respondents to the questionnaire than females, which is quite unusual in that you tend to get more females responding to this sort of questionnaire than male. So that suggests that probably the volunteer community, there are more men within the volunteer community than females. Perhaps less surprisingly, the majority of volunteers who always tend to be people that have got a little bit more time and aren't working. So most people age 55 plus. I think 86% in total were aged over 55, and none of the volunteers who responded to this survey were under age 25. That's the pie chart there for people who consider themselves to be disabled or have a long-term health condition. Ethnic background, so I think all the responses were from white backgrounds, but there was a little bit of diversity within the white backgrounds. And then most respondents said they're not LGBTQ+, but some are, which is great. So we can now compare that to local census data, just to make sure that we're engaging a representative community from our communities. So I think that's the last one of my slides. And yeah, we're now going to just swap the sharing over so that Sarah can talk you through the first one of our game-changing solutions that we're proposing within this project. So I think I just need to stop sharing this. Okay.
Okay. Let's see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, that's working.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
just get it full screen. Okay.
Brilliant.
Great. So as Catherine mentioned, I'm Sarah Beetham and I work for the Animal and Plant Health Agency. And I'm going to be talking about the grey squirrel fertility control element of the Red Squirrel Recovery Network project. So by fertility control, we mean using contraceptives to reduce numbers of grey squirrels. So contraceptives mixed into baits could be a humane and cost-effective tool for grey squirrel control, particularly in areas where culling is unacceptable, such as urban areas or areas where landowners aren't agreeable to culling. So contraceptives can both reduce population sizes of squirrels, but also reduce the rate of population recovery by squirrels once culling has occurred. So we're currently within a 5-year project funded by the UK Squirrel Accord and DEFRA and led by the Animal and Plant Health Agency. And this project aims to develop a bait containing a contraceptive and also a method for its deployment. So to deliver fertility control in the UK, we have 4 phases to deploy. So we're currently in the research and development phase, and this includes identifying a contraceptive suitable for grey squirrels, also developing a grey squirrel specific bait feeder and delivery method. So the contraceptives we're looking at could potentially affect other wildlife, so we want to make sure we're just targeting the grey squirrels. And also we aim to develop a model that can be used to compare the cost effectiveness of grey squirrel control methods, including fertility control. So once the research and development phase is complete, we then move on to landscape level trials. And within these trials, we'll evaluate the effort required to use fertility control on a large scale, assess the practicality and costs of fertility control compared to other methods, and also evaluate the effectiveness at a population level over a large area of contraception. So alongside the landscape level trials, we'll also be looking to test for registration so that the contraceptive could be used in general use by practitioners. So this will include engaging with the appropriate registration authorities, identification of suitable manufacturers to produce the contraceptive, and also collecting additional data on the contraceptive, including the safety of it, the efficacy, and the potential environmental impact of it. And then that leads to our overall main goal, which is the large-scale, widespread availability of a contraceptive for grey squirrel control. So this includes a large-scale manufacture of the contraceptive and also the rollout of contraceptives to practitioners. So to discuss the progress we made in the project so far. So in the research and development phase, we have tested multiple types of contraceptives, and we've made significant progress with a bait containing a contraceptive vaccine. So this contraceptive vaccine works by, when it's ingested, it causes the body to create antibodies against its own reproductive hormones, therefore inducing infertility. So far we've been testing these contraceptives mainly on laboratory rats, as it's far easier to deliver precise doses to rats, laboratory rats, rather than wild squirrels. Also, laboratory rats breed more frequently and more readily, so it's much more challenging to actually test these contraceptives on rats, but also it means we can progress through the testing quicker. So far we've proved infertility in the majority of rats. We've given a dose of this contraceptive bait directly into the mouth. We've also achieved a response and infertility from voluntary bait uptake. So if we actually provide a bait in a dish or through a drinking bottle, we've managed to show that this will induce a response by the body. And we've also been refining dose rates to try and get the best effect from the lowest dose levels possible to improve the cost effectiveness of a contraceptive. So as we've managed to achieve the immune response from voluntary bait uptake, we've then been able to move to testing on our captive squirrels. So we have a captive breeding colony of grey squirrels, which we are currently testing the contraceptive on. So we should receive the full result in around a month's time. We also, in conjunction with this, we're developing a bait formulation suitable for use in the field. So we need something that's going to last for a week or two, and also in different field conditions. So it needs to remain effective throughout all these different potential conditions in the field. So as well as the development of the contraceptive bait, we've also been looking at field delivery methods. So using these grey squirrel specific feeders shown, we've been trialing different delivery methods in different woodlands containing squirrels. And we've been using an imitation contraceptive bait to do this. So by using these feeders with an imitation bait, we've shown that in 4 days, we can deliver it to the majority of squirrels in most woodlands that we've tested it in. And using this feeder design, which is a metal case with a bait compartment that can only be accessed through a weighted door, we've shown that we can exclude other animals from accessing the bait. So from monitoring thousands of visits of grey squirrels to these feeders, we've only had 3 individual mice access the bait on 3 separate occasions, and that's the only other non-target species that have managed to access the bait through these feeders. In addition, we've been working with red squirrel volunteer groups up in Northumberland, in Cumbria and the Yorkshire Dales, and we've been gathering body weights of red squirrels through an automatic weighing device. And through using this device, we've been able to show that there's enough of a difference between red squirrel body weights and grey squirrel body weights. So we could actually set a minimum body weight in which to access a contraceptive through a door. and this would exclude all red squirrels while still allowing access by around over 90% of grey squirrels. In addition, we've developed a tool, a practical tool that uses cameras to estimate the densities of squirrels in woodlands. So this could help assess how many feeders you'd have to put out or traps you'd have to put out for effective control. And finally, we've developed a grey squirrel management model. So this is to help compare different management methods and also to plan landscape level contraceptive control. So initially we've based this model on Cumbria, as you can probably recognise. And these are all the woodland patches in Cumbria. And within these woodland patches, we've estimated the squirrel densities in each patch. And in each year, we estimate the densities, also the reproduction, the movements of squirrels between different woodland patches, and finally the death rate. So by using these factors, we can apply different control methods and compare their cost effectiveness. And by using this model so far, we've estimated that around 60% of squirrels in an area would need to eat the contraceptive bait to allow for a significant population reduction or indeed an eradication. So how does the Red Squirrel Recovery Network project fit in with our overall contraceptive development plan? So by the end of the Red Squirrel Recovery Network project, we plan to have a contraceptive bait that's ready to use for grey squirrel control. So to ensure we have all the tools ready and available in the box and have the best chance to ensure long-term red squirrel recovery, we need to be prepared. So as part of the project, we've included the following objectives. So in 2 areas within Lancashire and Cumbria, we will train networks of volunteer groups to deploy an imitation contraceptive via feeders so we can test the bait delivery methods on a landscape scale. So it's important by the time we have a contraceptive ready, we know how to deliver it to as many schools as possible over as wide an area as possible. In addition, in 2 areas within Northumberland and South Scotland, we'll train networks of volunteers to assess the ability of our feeders to both deliver bait to grey squirrels and to exclude red squirrels and other wildlife. So this would mean that we could potentially deploy the contraceptive safely and effectively in areas where there's both types of squirrel. We'll also train volunteers in grey squirrel population analysis using cameras. And all the data we gather we'll use to establish best practice training guides to allow the future rollout of a contraceptive to control grey squirrels. And finally, with our project partners, we'll raise awareness of the project and fertility control in local communities through the delivery of an education campaign. So thank you all for listening, and also I'd just like to thank the volunteers and the collaborators that have been part of our project so far.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay.
And now we're back to Catherine.
Yes.
Apologies, I think the chat function was disabled and I've just gone into the background settings and have enabled it. So hopefully you will be able to use the chat now. Cross fingers.
Is that through the Q&A?
No, it's not the Q&A, it's
the
actual chat function.
Ah, yeah.
It was, I don't know why, but for this one it was disabled. I didn't set it, but there you go.
Is the screen share back on, Kay? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, fab.
Although I can see 2 of it.
Okay, that's weird. Okay, I'm going to stop and try
yeah.
again. Is that better?
It's coming up with the. It's
No.
coming up with the notes.
Okay,
I think you need to flip it.
I'll just,
Oh.
okay.
I'm sorry. I think the chat's still apparently disabled. It's never I've never had to reset it in a webinar. It's always been enabled. So I apologise for it not being enabled. And I have changed the background settings, but I don't know whether it'll update it because this is already live.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Oh yeah, so Mike is going to talk through number 2.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yes, I'm going to mention the pine martins and its relationship to the Red Squirrel Recovery Network. Obviously, any project of this size covering such a wide geographical area will have to consider the impact of pine martins. Within Northumberland, we're seeing increasing numbers of pine martins appearing in our monitoring. So the Red Squirrel Recovery Network would seek to increase our understanding of their geographic areas and their impact that they're having on the red squirrel populations within those areas. There are a number of projects focusing specifically on pine martins, and the Red Squirrel Recovery Network project would seek to coordinate with those. So we will share the data that we are gathering in the field and also share the research and information that is being provided by these projects with our wider partner organisations and the volunteer groups that we're engaging with. Through sharing records and knowledge, we hope to gain a greater understanding of where we have pine martins, where they're interacting with red squirrels and grey squirrels, and the impact this is having. The project would not be seeking to do any large scale or any reintroductions. It's more a case of gaining an understanding through monitoring and recording.
Okay,
Catherine's going to talk about volunteers.
and apologies, the slides skipped on a bit then, but I'm back on the right one now. So another one of the what we're calling game-changing solutions, activities that we think are going to make a difference to how we manage and how we protect red squirrels in the future, is to involve more volunteers. I've already shown you the slide. We know that most groups want to see more people involved, more volunteering, and a wider range of volunteers. The fertility control that Sarah has just talked us through brings new opportunities and new roles for volunteers, and roles that might be more appealing to certain audiences. We also think that this project will be able to support new types of volunteering in the community, which might not be the traditional sign up and sign your life away as a volunteer, but more encouraging more people to take action on their doorstep in a voluntary capacity. So that's what we're thinking about, more volunteers and more volunteer opportunities, helping groups to become more resilient and helping more people to take action. The fourth activity we want to talk to you about is raising awareness and connecting more people to nature. And Mike Pratt touched on this in his introduction. We have to connect more people to nature. We know that nature connection is good for people's well-being. It's good from a social perspective for communities. It's good for training. Being closer to nature is a good thing, and more people need to be closer to nature. It's also there's been a lot of research from Derby University around nature connection, and that has now quite convincingly proven that people that have a stronger connection with nature and notice nature every day are more likely to lead or to make choices in their life which benefit wildlife. And that, that's what we all want. We want that beyond this project. We want people to make positive choices for red squirrels, but also positive choices for nature in general. We also know from other projects that an endearing mammal like the red squirrel connects people, and people like that, and people find that easier to connect to, much easier than mosses or bogs or something less cute. So that will be embedded within this project. It's something the lottery wants to see, and it's something all the partners want to see, looking at how we can use experiences in nature and experiences with red squirrels in a positive way for communities and individuals. So I'll hand back to Mike to talk through number 5.
engaging landowners and sharing best practice. The intention of the project is to try and raise the awareness of the issues of red squirrel conservation, the problems that are being faced by groups such as the volunteer groups with gaining access to land, by trying to link up landowners with volunteer groups and other people who are able to deliver red squirrel conservation on their behalf. There are a number of incentives available to landowners in order to fund such red squirrel monitoring and grey squirrel control. And if we can raise the awareness with more landowners, make the connections between the volunteer groups and try and widen the area over which we're able to deliver conservation. We're also looking to continue to develop the data that we are gathering. There's a wealth of effort being undertaken across the geographical area, and recording this information enables us to feed it into local plans as well as national plans. We're able to coordinate between different groups and also on a wider county and national level. The project intends to provide data sharing methods that are able to more people and make it easier for groups to gather and share information. And also training and support for volunteer groups. We intend to provide more training to a wider audiences, getting more people the training they need, not only to better provide red squirrel conservation, but to help encourage new volunteers and to gain access to new areas of land and help with the engagements with landowners. We can provide this training and get more people feeling comfortable and actively involved in red squirrel conservation. It'll benefit red squirrels as a whole. I'll now talk about the actual overviews of the whole project itself. We've mentioned a number of game-changing things and how this will now fit in with the whole project's intention. The actual budget for the project is yet to be confirmed. Operating across such a wide geographical area with so many different partners, it is ultimately going to be quite a substantial project. This will be up to £5 million for 5 years, with at least £1 million of that will be committed from the partner organisations as match funding. The project will intend to increase staff capacity. The intention is to have a small number of staff in each area within each of the partner groups in order to ensure that we can deliver the objectives that we're setting out. The project will intend to sustain its current grey squirrel contracts that we have, but also to increase these, enable more contracts with more landowners, and also make the connection between volunteer groups and landowners so those contracts are more widely available, which would enable volunteer groups to actually be more self-sustaining in the long term with dedicated funding specifically for their group, specifically in their area. Sarah's mentioned the fertility control trials. The fertility control provides a game-changing solution, but it is still something that is yet to be fully developed. The project aims to actually finalise the development, but also to provide the volunteer groups with the framework and the understanding to deliver the fertility product as soon as it becomes available. We do not want to wait until the contraceptive is ready before we actually train the volunteers, groups and others in order to how to use it. The project will enable us to deliver the fertility control as soon as it is available. The project would also intend to have a small grant scheme. This is something that would be open to the wider communities. For example, school groups or volunteer groups want to engage with the local community. There's the opportunity to request funding to support these efforts. This is something that will enable community groups to undertake engagement for wider audiences in more areas. I mentioned about the landowners and raising awareness about the environmental schemes that are available, for example, countryside stewardship, is increasingly important. Funding is always scarce, and there's so many people in need funding. So in the project, will enable them to access this funding, to raise awareness of how they can do that, and share best practices within the groups and with the volunteer community as how best they can engage with their landowners and get them encourage them onto schemes. The project will continue the monitoring and inform and use the monitoring in order to inform the decisions that it makes. So as I say, there's a wealth of information out there and a wealth of data being recorded. We intend to use this to best focus the scarce resources and identify areas where more resourcing is required, and hope and the intention of the project will be able to support these areas. The project will improve communications and public relations across the whole partnership group. The partnership looks to employ engagement officers, which will not only engage with wider audiences, but they will also support volunteer and community groups in making their own engagements. Obviously, as resources are scarce, the project will provide funding for groups to provide equipment, expenses, and training. We've been in discussion with Northern Red Squirrel leads as to how best this could be facilitated. This is still under discussion, and this is very much still part of something yet to be decided. This is the initial presentation, is just to give people an idea and is the start of the discussions that will be following. And we very much intend the volunteer groups to take a lead role in deciding on what form that support will take. With such a large geographical area, we do need to try and focus on some particular places that we can focus our effort and be used as examples for ongoing work. So a number of specific areas will be chosen in which we can focus activity and be used as examples for the wider project area. The project will also seek to provide a forum for networking and more increased partnership working, not only with the project partners, but also with the wider communities and volunteer groups. Sharing of information and providing support will be crucial in the future. Thank you.
So this is the final slide, really, just to talk you all through the process, really, and what the next 18 months will involve to when we imagine being able to start the project if the funding request is successful. So we're currently working on a round 1 application. In that application, we need to describe roughly what we want to do, but we don't include really that much detail. Obviously, we have to answer the questions that the lottery put to us, but they know it's a round 1 and they know there's more work to do during the development phase. So that round 1 application will be submitted in mid-February, along the lines which we've just described to you tonight. We feel that addresses the challenges that have been raised by volunteer groups. It addresses the challenges that have been raised by partners, and the needs that are identified in different strategies, and the direction and the funding criteria that the lottery are asking us to think about. It's going to be a hard few weeks. It's going to be a very quick 4 weeks until we submit that application. We then have to wait. We wait 3 months and we should hear a decision in, we think, June, but the meeting dates haven't been announced yet. So some of these dates that are on the slide now, I mean, obviously they're at the discretion of the lottery and they might change. So we should get a phone call in June, we hope. And we hope that will say, yes, you've been successful and you can proceed to the next stage. At that stage, the lottery will give us a small grant, probably around £150,000. We think at the moment that's the sort of ballpark figure we're going to ask for that amount, to enable us to develop the full application. That is a huge task. It takes a year. The lottery asks for all sorts of information. I've done lots of them before. In the days when we used to print them out, you literally took in a box of 5 or 6 ring binders of that amount of information. It's business plans and it's detailed budgets and it's copies of all the consultation, and it's an audience plan and a volunteer plan, you know, more plans than you could ever imagine. The lottery can ask for that because they're paying us to write it, and that's what they want the money to be spent on. And what that means is we test everything at that stage, and at that stage we need groups to work with us. We need groups to talk to us and help us refine our ideas and really add the detail to that. We then submit that. You know, nowadays it's a click of a button, but it's a metaphorical box of paper, or a digital box of paper, if you like. We then have another 3-month wait. So we're expecting that we'll submit that in towards the end of 2024. So we'll get the decision for our round 1 application in June this year. There'll then be about a 3-month wait because there's a lot of paperwork to fill in, there's some recruitment and that sort of thing, until autumn this year. We think we'll be able to start that development phase around October this year. And that will take a year then to submit the full application, which is the round 2 application. Heritage, National Lottery Heritage Fund can ask us to take longer. They might say you're not ready yet, so that timescale might slip, but at the moment that's what we're working on. And we would then expect to hear whether that full application has been successful in the spring of 2025. The lottery have announced no dates at all that far ahead for 2025, so we're just going on what the dates have been this year and last year and assuming that they'll roll them forwards. So if the whole bid is successful, it would start in summer 2025 and it would end in summer 2030. So there's a lot of time to keep talking about this, keep discussing it, and you know, this is the start of a conversation really tonight. Finally, the other thing I wanted to say on this was to reiterate something that Mike Pratt said earlier. In our conversations with the lottery so far, they have asked us to reassure groups that a bid going in, a partnership bid going in at this very top level, will in no way impact any level of smaller grants that are available to local groups on a local level. And in fact, they said they'd heard from a couple of groups that thought that they didn't support grey squirrel control, and they would like us to stress that that is not the case. They do support grey squirrel control as long as it's within a project that delivers all their other funding outcomes and priorities, and you know, it meets their criteria, etc., etc. So they're very encouraging, and they would really like to hear from groups about smaller applications. And I would say that given that this larger bid, Red Squirrel Recovery Network, isn't even planning to start by 2025, a group could have applied and completed a project before this one even gets off the ground, actually. Within the Red Squirrel Recovery Network, with having additional staff and more support to groups, we're also hoping that that could involve some fundraising support to help groups that have never applied for grant funding before, etc. I'm sure the lottery are keen to talk about that as well. So I think that is it. Yeah. I'll hand back to Kay.
Thanks very much, Catherine. I just want to express my deepest regret that we didn't have the chat function enabled. I don't know why that happened. Usually when I set up webinars, that's automatically enabled. I will blame the Zoom update that I had recently. Okay, do you want to stop sharing your screen, Catherine, and then we'll just, I know there've been a few questions sent in, but and some people have been asking. So there's a question. While there have to be geographical limits to the project, areas such as the Yorkshire Dales with its red squirrel populations are absent. Is there scope to include them if willing?
Shall I take this? Yes, there is scope to obviously share the information and research we have as also the best practices we have. So we will having red squirrel officers in each region, but there's nothing to say that they cannot work outside of these regions. We understand that the pressure facing red squirrels is from grey squirrels is at a landscape scale and not confined by geographical borders. So the project would seek to address the issues wherever they exist.
Thank you. And then Bob Cartwright says, for us in South Lakeland, much of the threat to red squirrel populations comes from the greys migrating north from Lancashire. Similarly, the people of Lancashire are a key audience to be persuaded of the case for reds and against greys. Will the project allow engagement with communities out with the project area?
Do you want me to say something on this one? So I think one thing that I perhaps could have gone into a bit more detail about is our plans for communications and PR. This project with the fertility control and other aspects of the public project actually gives new opportunities to talk about red squirrels and grey squirrels much more in the press and allow that wider high profile engagement and communications, and we really want to see that happen. So we will be resourcing a communications plan and resourcing capacity to respond to any communications, which will enable us to be more confident about having those communications in the first place. Lancashire Wildlife Trust are a partner, so they're ideally placed to help spread some of that messaging, even if it's not directly through the project activity and through squirrel groups. Lancashire Wildlife Trust have engaged people across that county. So I don't know, Rachel, do you want to add anything to that about Lancashire in particular?
Yeah, obviously Lancashire is huge. and red squirrels are kind of towards the very south of the county, but yeah, as Catherine said, the aim of this project really is to not just engage in those project areas, but to have more of a national presence, and so we can spread the message further and wider, really. So yeah, hopefully there will be scope to engage those communities kind of between those red squirrel areas a little bit more.
And I would say it's a dual national presence, so it's England and Scotland. Yeah, we're definitely not forgetting about Scotland, and likewise we'll have the same issues further north about engaging people on the edge of the range.
Thank you. There's a question from Louise Kemp. Do you have an app to collect data for volunteers?
And do you mean, I don't suppose you can answer, Louise, but I'm assuming you mean data like the demographics rather than the squirrel data. So there is apps in place to collect squirrel data, to collect data which is collected by volunteers, but I'm assuming this question relates to data about who the volunteers are, and I don't think that's on the app at the moment, but it's something we would embed within this project to understand more about who our volunteers are and what the volunteers are doing and what their background is, etc.
I can say something about the records app actually, just in case. Yes, obviously there is an app. There's an app for everything nowadays. RSNE does have a recording system that does use an app and also a web form function to record red squirrel monitoring and control efforts. The project would enable us to further develop this, making it more widely available to more groups and also more members of each group. That is something that is a key part of this project going forward.
Thanks, Mike. To what extent have public and third sector landowners such as National Park Authorities, Natural England, Woodland Trust, RSPB, National Trust been engaged in scoping and supporting the bid? In our experience, their active support and encouragement can be crucial to community and volunteer commitment.
Part of the work we'll be undertaking during the development phase will to ensure that we actually have further discussions with such landowners and third-party sectors to ensure that there is that support. We've already made initial discussions with them, and we do have support from, for example, the Forestry Commission and other large landowners like that. So while we at the moment have engaged to a limited extent, that is something we'd be looking to fully explore during the next phase.
Thank you.
A lot of those organisations are already engaged in some way in the current, what's currently delivered for red squirrels, both north and south of the border. So it would be to build on that.
Thank you. The components of the project as described do not appear to include an objective to make the elements self-sustaining when the project ends. What are the partners' hopes to achieve this in this respect when it finishes?
So I think that's maybe an omission on our part in terms of how we put the presentation together, rather than an omission in the project, because actually in the bid we're putting that up front. That's the aim of the project, really. We cannot where we are at the moment with red squirrel conservation is thanks to decades of effort from fantastic effort from volunteers like everyone we've got on this listening in tonight. We know that it's resource intensive, and the lottery knows it's resource intensive, and we know from what the groups have told us and volunteers have told us that it can't continue forever. There isn't funding to keep resourcing something that's very expensive, and we need to make some changes. So that's really what the project is built around, the fact that the fertility control is potentially a new game-changing solution, which will be more sustainable in the long run. If we can diversify the volunteers and support groups to think more about succession planning and attract younger volunteers, that will leave a legacy which is more self-sustaining. If we can provide support now to groups to engage with other funders and look at public sector funding or landowner funding or agri-environment schemes, again, that's more self-sustaining. So I think legacy and creating a more self-sustaining model for red squirrel conservation is definitely what this project is all about. There definitely wouldn't be an intention to continue beyond the 5 years at the level that this project will be, which is around £1 million a year. That there wouldn't be an intention to maintain that level of expenditure.
Thank you, Catherine. This is one for the fertility control. Considering the impact of climate change, particularly record temperatures in 2022, will the bait and the bait delivery method be tested at the higher temperatures we might expect?
Yes, is the answer. So we're actually currently testing the bait at higher temperatures to make sure that it will last in the field. I mean, the main objective at the moment was to get something that actually worked first in rats and then in squirrels. Once we get something that's as effective as possible, then we can look at adding different elements such as cold, heat, because obviously we're still getting very, very cold winters as we're experiencing at the moment. So we want something that will last if it's frozen potentially, but also last at very high temperatures as well.
Mm-hmm. And people are only really going to be probably putting it out for a very short amount of time, aren't they, for each over the year?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're aiming for about 1 to 2 week deployment at the moment. That's how long we would want to deploy a vaccine, because we know we can feed it to most squirrels in that time.
Thank you. We have huge gaps in regions actively monitoring. How will RSA help to recruit volunteers to enable a truly joined up effort for the project, I imagine?
Well, that is definitely one of the goals of the project. I don't think we can quite answer the question of how we'll do that yet. We've got some ideas. We've got a huge range of experience within the partnership of what works in terms of recruiting volunteers. If you look at one of Northumberland Wildlife Trust's previous projects, Restoring Batty, engaged volunteers in the most remote part of England. We know it is possible. We need to resource it. We need to find out who those volunteers are, and we need to look at other ways of getting them involved. We also need to look at new approaches where people where we can build confidence in public sightings and public monitoring, so that they're involved in monitoring without necessarily doing any other volunteer roles, or not necessarily even being involved in a group. And I guess right at the heart of that is we need to properly understand where those gaps are, and look at how we support that, and if necessary, how are there other ways of filling in some of the gaps, as long as there aren't too many gaps to fill, through paid staff, because it is a hugely broad area with very urban areas, but also incredibly rural areas, and there might just realistically be some areas where there are going to be gaps, which we need to fill with staff or contractors. Is that fair, Mike? Have you got anything else to?
No, it's such a large area, and the number of volunteers out there is something that we really need to try and increase. But I think also the volunteer groups that are currently existing are so diverse within themselves. We have groups that have been established for decades who are very successful and very good at doing what they're doing. And there are other groups that are very small or just starting. I think if we can share the experiences of those successful groups with smaller groups, encourage new groups in areas that maybe the groups don't exist, I think that will enable a more sustainable long-term future, encouraging more volunteers to take part, and also providing that extra support that all the volunteer groups need.
I think the only other thing to say on that is that that's something that needs to be developed in detail in the development phase, and we'll definitely welcome input from existing volunteers, and we'll go out into communities to talk to people that don't volunteer and learn a bit more about why they don't volunteer. So that was one of the questions on the volunteer survey, and some people did feedback. You need to talk to the people that don't volunteer rather than asking the people that do volunteer why other people don't volunteer. I mean, which we know we need to do that. That's something that will happen in the development phase.
Thanks, Catherine. Trudy lives in an area where there are no red squirrels. If the fertility control is successful, could there be scope to train people who are then qualified to administer this method of management of grey squirrels, charging for the services and products, and therefore raising money for the cause?
So our original aim, the aim of the Squirrel Accord, the current aims are to protect trees and also for red squirrel conservation. So this is why we're producing the contraceptive. So although red squirrel conservation is a big aim in areas where grey squirrels are causing damage or could potentially cause a threat to neighbouring red squirrel areas, then obviously we still want to control them in those areas. In fact, at the moment, they would be our kind of key target areas where red squirrels could potentially recover back into where they've been driven from in the past. Because we currently have a feeder that we know can exclude the majority of wildlife. Until we have a feeder that we definitely know will exclude all reds, we'll be using it in grey squirrel only areas, but where there's a kind of buffer zone between red and grey squirrel areas, so that they'd still be targeting areas where red squirrels could recover too, potentially. So yeah, alongside this project, we will be doing other landscape level projects in further down south where, you know, there's no red squirrels. But yeah, this will all feed into the wider development of the contraceptive.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think in terms of people training people to administer the method and raising money from that, I'm not entirely sure what that will look like at the moment. I think we'd have to, you know, we'll have to get a bit further down the line with the registration and then the final products before we kind of come to that. But being that grey squirrels can breed 2, sometimes 3 times a year, what do you say is a breeding season?
Yeah, so I was answering a few questions before we started this, the question and answer session. I was being a bit proactive and typing some answers. So basically I was saying, this is in response to the initial question, how long will it last in a squirrel? How long will the squirrels be infertile for? So they certainly won't be infertile for life. We're aiming at the moment at the bare minimum, we'd want them to be infertile for several months so we can cover the peaks in breeding. So ideally you would administer a contraceptive just before the winter breeding season, and then maybe also partway through the summer to ensure that they remain infertile throughout the whole breeding season. Now, of course, we're getting some examples of squirrels breeding year round, and we're still aiming to try and get something that will last as long as possible, but we can still have a very significant effect if we just cover those peaks in breeding, as we only need to deploy a bait for, as I said, 1 to 2 weeks to hit the majority of squirrels in an area. So it's not a kind of massive effort in terms of the control.
Thanks, Sarah. What are the estimated costs of production of the contraceptive, and are any manufacturers providing funding to the project?
So as you mentioned, Kay, we're not at the point of taking it to a manufacturer at the moment. We're still trialing it in squirrels at the moment, and we still have to refine the bait formulations to ensure the longevity in the field. So we don't know what the final bait formulation is yet, although we've made very good progress with our vaccine. Therefore, estimating costs at the moment is very difficult. We would have to speak to several manufacturers and also look at sources of funding, as this contraceptive could potentially be used on a wide range of pest species. We would expect that once we have something, that we have the data ready for registration that's very effective, we would attract a lot of funding to take it through the registration.
Thanks, Sarah.
I was just going to add to that funding the licensing of the product and the manufacture of the product is going to be out with this project.
Yes.
Really what this project is about, the last thing we want to happen is for the contraceptive to have been licensed and then us not really know what to do or not be ready to use it. So this project is about making sure we've tested it in all of our communities that have been working so hard for so long to keep on top of graze by other methods, and that we've tested it. We know exactly what we're doing with it. We know how, we understand properly how the volunteer groups work, how different types of volunteer work. We know we can train volunteers. We know we can give them all the right information. So as soon as that licensing happens and the product is available, it's all systems go, and you've got the equipment you need and you've got the skills you need to use it and start deploying it.
Definitely. Thank you, Catherine. Peter Garsness, what steps are you taking to engage Forestry England and Forestry Inland Scotland to encourage volunteers to work in the NFE and submit their own data to the project database?
I can take this.
Thanks, Mike.
We're continually working with Forestry England, and I'm sure our Scottish partners are continually working with Forestry in Scotland. It is an ongoing dialogue, and we'll be looking to continue the pressure and to continue those discussions to in order access into Forestry England land or forestry estates to be more straightforward and more accessible. It's something that is a continual frustration to ourselves, and we know it is to a lot of volunteer groups. So yeah, we will do as much as we can to continue that pressure to get the buy-in from them. Things like the training, that helps. We can ensure that we can get as many of the volunteers trained as possible. That makes it easier for the forestry estates to accept that. It makes it easier for them to access the land. So we'll just continue those efforts.
Thanks, Mike. Are there any plans on introducing pine martens into Cumbria? It seems where there is a high population of pine martens, there is a high population of red squirrels.
I'm going to very quickly say there absolutely isn't within this project, but Steve might want to give a bit more detailed answer about anything else that we know that's happening in Cumbria.
Yeah, can do. There's a project in the South Lakes which is about to conclude called the Boom Project, which stands for Back on Our Map. They've done a feasibility study of reintroducing pine marten in the South Lakes, and they want to, it's led by the University of Cumbria, and they want to proceed with a reintroduction programme in the South Lakes, although it's neither funded nor licensed at this stage, so it's early days, but they're hoping to work in the Rustland Grisdale area, and have been working with landowners and local community where there's been quite a bit of support for it. Although we are very conscious and aware that some red squirrel groups in Cumbria are very nervous and not at all in favour at this stage of pine marten reintroductions. But the feasibility study indicates that it's a good prospect ecologically, and certainly we in Cumbria Wildlife Trust are a bit uncertain for two reasons at the moment. One is we need to be convinced that the donor population won't be damaged by a project like this, and the proposal is to take pine martens from the north of Scotland and bring them down to Cumbria. The second is that clearly, in the long term, pine martens could well be one of the game-changing solutions for red squirrel conservation, but we need to monitor and go cautiously, I think, probably in an area like the South Lakes. And thirdly, pine martens are on the way anyway. We know that they're in northern Cumbria already on the edge of Kielder, so our cameras in Kershup regularly get pine martens on them. Just a small population, but they will hopefully in time, maybe over the next few decades, expand and spread further south, which would be, in some ways preferable for them to do it under their own steam rather than have to be reintroduced. And this year, just in the last few months, we've had 2 records of pine martens in South Cumbria, one dead, one as a road casualty. So, they are already getting down there, but for them to have an impact on grey squirrel populations, the density needs to be probably significantly higher than is currently the case in Cumbria or Northumberland, I would suggest. But there's lots of things we don't know, so lots of uncertainty. But in answer to the question, there's a long answer to a short question. The answer is there are plans, not by any of the partners on this call, to look at pine marten reintroduction in the South Lakes.
Thanks, Steve. Will there be any financial support via the project going towards the gene drive? The gene drive is being funded and worked on mainly by the European Squirrel Initiative. And we, the UK Squirrel Accord, is very interested in it, but I think it's quite early days for it yet. And I mean, certainly within the scope of this project, there's nothing that's going towards the gene drive at this stage. But we'll just have to kind of wait to see where the scientists go with that and see what the information comes out. Once the contraceptive vaccine is registered, would it be feasible to issue the food for the public to feed greys in parks and other places where greys are prevalent?
So once again, that kind of depends on the registration process. So it would be up to the registration authorities to decide how that contraceptive would be deployed. So it could potentially be deployed by licensed pest control operatives as kind of lethal control is used currently. There is a possibility that it could be made available for the general public, but as we'd want it to be very targeted and towards grey squirrels only, we'd have to insist that it's deployed alongside the species-specific bait delivery system. So using a licensed system might be more appropriate, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we'll just have it out for general use. Were there any questions that Sarah that you've been answering
yes
already that you want to pick out specifically? Or
let's see. So one was, does the contraceptive work on both male and female squirrels? And the answer is yes. It works on both estrogen and testosterone. Someone asked which drug manufacturers we will use, but I said we haven't actually approached any yet. That's going to be in the coming few years. We'll have to speak to manufacturers, both for the feeders and also for the drugs, to see who would be the most appropriate manufacturer to take it to market. How soon will the contraceptive become available, and how is the dummy run distribution assessed? So as I mentioned, we plan for it to be available within the lifetime of this project, so within the decade. In terms of the dummy runs, so we will use a method that we've used before, which is using a bait marker, so a bait dye. And when the squirrels consume the bait containing the dye, their hair becomes marked, so permanently dyed. And then you have to trap and sample squirrels from over specific areas, and then we'll see the proportion of populations that actually test positive for this dye. So it's simulating how you would actually deploy a contraceptive. So it would tell us the proportion of squirrels in a population that would consume a contraceptive should you put it out in the same way. And let's see. I think, how will the targeted areas be chosen? So I think we'll use a combination of our grey squirrel management model to select areas that will be suitable to test the deployment on a landscape scale, but also we'll speak to the volunteer groups as well. We'll look for areas that are suitable in terms of volunteer group availability, but also land permissions as well, landowner permissions. And I think that's all. Someone asked, why do we have captive grey squirrels? And so we need a captive breeding population so we can trial the contraceptive on them and monitor them very closely for its effect and any impacts it has on them, because we wouldn't want to put it straight out into woodlands, deliver it to squirrels without actually ensuring that it's as effective and as safe as possible.
Thanks, Sarah. There's another one in that says, are you considering collaborating with squirrel biologists in Italy with respect to their grey squirrel problem?
So I think maybe Giovanna is the best person to answer that, but we're not currently, but I'm sure any progress we make in terms of squirrel contraception, we will share with them. We're not collaborating with them currently, but who knows in the future. But you know, the research community has to share data, has to share information to ensure that it progresses as quickly as possible.
Sarah, so everybody, if I can add something to this, so the Italians are very keen to collaborate in the future, certainly, because recently they have surgically sterilized a population of squirrels, which costs a fortune. So they're very, very keen, if anything happens when the contraceptive is developed, to collaborate further. And something else I was wanting to add to what Sarah said, why captive squirrels? If a contraceptive goes to registration, the registration authorities and the registration dossier will require data on the safety of a drug on the species for which that drug has been developed.
Thank you, Giovanna. Beyond the earlier questionnaire and this useful webinar, to what extent and how will interested community and volunteer red squirrel groups have the opportunity to participate in developing the bid and, if successful, to the development phase of the project?
So to what extent? As much as we can and as much as they want during the development phase. And now, before this next bid goes in, is going to be really limited by the time it takes to produce the documents. The lottery needs to meet their deadline. So we're up against it, but nothing will be set in stone at this stage. In terms of how, I was just reflecting earlier what a change COVID has made for us to be able to talk to people like this. And this, we first started talking about this project in 2019, and it actually, a previous version of this project was submitted to the lottery in 2020. It was then pulled by the lottery because the lottery withdrew all applications that had been submitted so that they could focus on emergency COVID grants. At that time, though, tonight we would have all been driving through the snow to try to get somewhere. You know, we'd have been doing repeated presentations in the depths of Cumbria or Northumberland or Southern Scotland or whatever, and everyone would have been having to come out in the snow, and we wouldn't have been able to speak to everyone because, you know, some people wouldn't be able to get out. So what a great change that has brought about, and that means that we can continue to do this. So I think in the development phase we will do more webinars like this. We'll probably do smaller chat functions. We want to look at how we can get volunteers represented on the steering group, and how we can work more closely with the chairs of Northern Red Squirrels, but also what is the equivalent representation for volunteer groups in Scotland. And also we don't want to forget about the volunteer groups in Merseyside. So how do we need to talk to you about how that works, but we want to find a solution to that so that volunteers can input. We can do more questionnaires. We can, I mean, in the development phase, we can go and visit people as well, and we will go and visit groups to look at that in the field, and definitely Sarah will need to do that for some of the fertility control stuff as well, in terms of determining where that can happen.
Definitely. There's a question, does Natural England support the project? Back to Mike.
Yes. I believe initial discussions have been had with Natural England, and although they haven't provided a formal letter of support to us because we haven't asked them yet, I would not envisage any issues with them providing support to us going forward.
I think just to mention that the lottery's changed its rules on letters of support, so you used to submit as many as you could find, and now I think maybe they realised that they couldn't read them all, so now they have a maximum of 6, and they really want that to be more from groups that demonstrate that we're addressing their key outcome, which is a wider range of people. So they want a lot of those 6 letters of support to come from community groups. So that's why we haven't asked Natural England for a letter of support, because it's not needed for the lottery. I think, you know, there's a lot of statutory bodies and other partners and landowners have been mentioned in the chat, and just because they're not represented in the partnership doesn't mean they don't support the project and they're not involved. They just won't be a joint applicant in the bid, and they won't be directly involved in delivering the bid, but I mean, we'll be working with them all the time, I imagine.
I think I'm right in saying though that Natural England are on the RSNE management group, aren't they? So they are kind of linked.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Even if they don't always attend.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. I think they're all the questions. Does anyone want to say any kind of final words? Any panelists' final words?
Huge thanks to everyone that's turned up tonight, and everyone that completed the questionnaire, and everyone that is continuing to be out there.
Yeah,
working, volunteering for Red Squirrels. I mean,
definitely.
that's
In all sorts of weathers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine. Well, thank you, everybody, all our panelists, and thank you, everyone who's attended. I am extremely sorry that the chat function was messed around. And if we do this again, I will definitely check that it's enabled next time. I'm sure Mike will get a few emails for feedback, but this is being recorded, and so I will let Mike and Catherine have access to the recording, and they can share it as they want. Yeah, apart from, I think there will be follow-ups, won't there, Catherine, for this? So we will carry on speaking to people.
Yeah,
definitely. Just say that if anyone does have any questions or comments, please, by all means, feel free to email me.
Great. Thanks very much, Mike. Brilliant. Okay, well, hopefully that was a good roundup of the first application of the process, and hopefully we'll all be successful. But thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you everyone for attending.
And we probably should mention, keep buying your lottery tickets. You know,
Yes.
the National Lottery Heritage Fund is funded by players, so go out and buy a ticket, and maybe we won't need to make the bid then, you know.
Yes, that's it. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.